The water level on Lake Mead has dropped 130 feet since the late 1990s. What does that mean? That means the surface used to be up there at the top of what they call the bathtub ring.
What if the most serious change happening in America wasn't on Wall Street or in Washington, but at the edge of a lake most people will never visit? Silent, slow, invisible, until it reaches your home. Lake Mead, once a symbol of abundance, is shrinking faster than any system around it can adapt. And while millions still say, "That doesn't affect me," the truth is already flowing through your faucet, written into your electric bill, and hiding in the price of your groceries. This is not just a story about water. It is a story about the moment a nation begins to feel a shift long before it realizes one has begun. The footage that changed everything. Looking at the footage, most viewers try to comfort themselves. They say, "This does not affect me." The images feel distant, like they belong to somewhere far away, somewhere disconnected from everyday life. But Lake Mead is not a remote tragedy, and its draining shoreline is not simply a Western water problem. It is a silent rearranger of daily life across the United States. The water you drink, the electricity that cools your home in summer, even the lettuce or beef you place into your grocery cart, all of them run through Lake Mead's story. The lake level is falling so rapidly that systems depending on it are beginning to malfunction. What once seemed like a hypothetical scenario is unfolding in real time. It did not happen in a single dramatic moment, but slowly, quietly, almost unnoticeably. Only when comparing footage from year to year does the reality come into focus.
At the largest reservoir in the nation, which looked like this in 2000. Take a look at what it looks like now. It was so low it could become useless to communities that rely on it.
Where water once touched rock, long stretches of earth now stand exposed. Boat docks that once floated effortlessly now sit dry on dirt, tilted and stranded, like relics from a past that ended without anyone noticing. Along the canyon walls surrounding the reservoir lies a pale mineral ring, dozens of meters above the current water level. Locals call it the bathtub ring, a permanent white scar measuring exactly how far the water has retreated. It is history written in calcium, silently marking the difference between then and now, without charts, without data, and without argument. The lake still holds water, but everything built around it is slowly stepping outside the design limits it once relied upon. Marinas remain, but many cannot function. Access ramps stretch further every year, sometimes extended multiple times within a single season. Each extension acknowledging a truth engineers hesitate to speak aloud. The water is retreating faster than infrastructure can adapt. At first, these changes arrive disguised. They are delivered through operational updates, not emergency declarations. Words like temporary closure, reduced capacity, and modified access hours begin to appear, until slowly they no longer feel temporary. A marina closing stops being newsworthy. Traveling farther to reach the shoreline becomes routine. A system designed to last decades now functions only partially, and Americans begin to internalize that low water is becoming normal. This is the earliest visible signal, the mark that something structural has shifted. The lake is not empty, yet the system built around it is already failing. And when a system fails before the resource disappears, it usually means larger consequences are still ahead. The most critical misunderstanding about reservoir decline is believing it only matters when the lake runs dry. The truth is the opposite. Systems begin breaking long before the final drop disappears. Reservoirs are not just water storage pools, they are engineered platforms. They form the foundation for multiple interconnected systems: municipal water supply, agricultural irrigation, hydropower generation, tourism economies, property markets, and demographic stability. When water falls even slightly below its assumed operating range, every system connected to it begins to feel the strain. At first, the damage is invisible, buried inside paperwork and policy language. Restrictions are written, allocation schedules are reviewed, contingency plans are activated. None of these are met with alarm, because they are delivered through documents, not headlines. But then, subtle changes begin to affect the real world. Walkways extend, water access shrinks. Tourism becomes seasonal, local revenue fluctuates, property value projections show hesitation, fishing seasons shorten. These are not separate problems. They are symptoms of the same cause. a foundation shifting beneath an entire region. The moment that matters is not when a lake becomes empty. It is when the assumption of stability is broken. And that moment has already passed. Household water slowly becomes controlled. As water levels drop below critical markers, the problem no longer remains confined to docks, dams, or distant footage. It crosses into daily life, into kitchens, gardens, and household budgets. When reservoir levels fall past predefined thresholds, water authorities do not sound emergency alarms or panic publicly. They simply follow protocol. Allocation plans that were written long before most citizens knew they even existed begin to activate automatically. Each stage corresponds to a number, and each number represents change. When the lake falls beneath a specific line, the amount of water available to cities, districts, and eventually neighborhoods decreases. Initially, these reductions are invisible. They live on spreadsheets and in policy language buried deep inside council documents. No one notices because nothing at home appears different. But once restrictions are put into motion, consequences begin quietly drifting into everyday routines. The first area where the public feels change is outdoors. Lawn irrigation schedules shorten. Certain neighborhoods can water only on specific days or within early morning time windows. Garden hoses become regulated by rules. Green lawns slowly turn patchy, and front yards that once symbolized suburban stability begin showing uneven shades of brown. The change does not happen because people have suddenly become careless or environmentally conscious. It happens because the system no longer carries enough capacity for normal behavior. Home car washing is banned. Decorative home fountains are shut off. Families find themselves thinking twice before using sprinklers. Water begins to feel like a resource that must be rationed rather than assumed. At the same time, price becomes another channel of restriction. No city raises water rates overnight. They do it through a drip of small adjustments. A fee added this year, a different tier introduced next year, a price increase a few seasons later. 5 or 6 years down the line, the difference is undeniable. For some households, the changes are merely something to notice. For those living on fixed incomes, especially retirees, rising costs are more than an inconvenience. They are pressure. Most importantly, these rules are not designed as temporary. When cities update water plans, they do not assume levels will recover. They assume scarcity is permanent. Restriction becomes normalized. Conserving water becomes a cultural expectation. Everyday actions such as showering, brushing teeth, or filling a watering can begin to require thought. Water is no longer a habit. It is a controlled asset. At this stage, the lake has not run dry, but life inside American homes has already changed. The shift occurs not because a crisis has struck suddenly, but because a foundational assumption has silently broken. The assumption that water will always be available without thought. Electricity quietly becomes more expensive. The next impact does not arrive through water pipes. It arrives through the electrical grid because water and electricity are deeply connected. Many of America's largest reservoirs, including Lake Mead, exist not only to store water, but also to power hydroelectric turbines. For decades, energy from these dams has delivered affordable and reliable electricity to millions of homes. Hydropower relies on one premise: water levels remain high enough to generate sufficient downward pressure. Once water falls below this operating range, turbines continue to run, but they no longer perform as they were designed to. At first, nothing appears to change for consumers. Lights still turn on. Air conditioners still hum in summer heat. Phones still charge on bedside tables. But behind the scenes, engineers are being forced to compensate. Hydropower, once a predictable and steady foundation, becomes a variable that can no longer be counted on. Every unit of energy lost from hydroelectric generation must be replaced, and the substitute sources often cost significantly more. Natural gas frequently fills the gap. Unlike water, which arrives freely through gravity, fossil fuel energy must be purchased continuously. It consumes money every hour it runs. At first, these shifts appear only in internal reports and planning documents, where plant operators quietly record decreased output and increased reliance on secondary sources. Then, without warning or drama, the trend enters the public sphere. Electricity bills begin to rise, slowly but steadily. Households rarely notice when rates climb by small increments. But after several cycles of adjustments, families begin to feel it. Electricity becomes a heavier monthly expense, and unlike water, electricity cannot easily be sacrificed. A lawn can die, a car can air dry, but electricity powers refrigerators that prevent food from spoiling. It powers heating and cooling that protect human life in extreme weather. It keeps medical devices running. It allows work, school, communication, and daily survival. In this new reality, electricity becomes something people must pay for, no matter how costly it becomes. Because the alternative is not inconvenience, it is danger. For families living paycheck to paycheck, every increase forces trade-offs. They are forced to choose between comfort and groceries, between cooling a home and buying medication. As water becomes unstable, electricity, which once felt guaranteed, becomes a financial and operational uncertainty. Hydropower plants begin to operate more cautiously. Grid planners begin to redesign energy supply not with temporary fixes, but with permanent revisions. The psychological shift is the most important consequence. The country begins to accept that affordable electricity is no longer guaranteed, that water levels determine more than just access to a lake. They determine the cost of living itself. At this point, the lake still exists. The dam still stands. Power still flows. But the role of water has fundamentally changed. It is no longer merely a natural resource. It has become a pressure point that reshapes every part of American life. The dinner table begins to change. When water and electricity begin shifting silently in the background, many people still feel they can stay untouched. They believe that as long as their faucet still runs and their lights still turn on, the issue remains someone else's problem. But the next phase of this chain leaves no household unaffected, because it targets something no American can avoid: food. Most of the water held in major reservoirs across the United States does not go to cities. It does not fill showers or swimming pools. It flows into irrigation systems that sustain enormous agricultural regions, places where fields stretch far beyond the horizon, feeding millions across the country. When allocation limits tighten, these farming regions are the next to feel the shift. The first signal is not dramatic. Crops do not die overnight. Instead, water districts reduce the number of acres that farmers are allowed to irrigate. Irrigation schedules shrink. Some fields are watered less. Others are left completely dry. Farmers begin making decisions that previous generations never imagined, switching to crops that need less water, abandoning certain fields until further notice, or accepting lower yields because water is simply not available at the levels once expected. On paper, these are described as adaptive management strategies, but the translation is simple. Supply is shrinking. When crops shrink, supply chains feel the tremor next. Trucks do not carry the same volume. Processing plants receive fewer shipments. Distributors have less inventory. And eventually, supermarkets, the final step in the chain, adjust. The consumer never sees the farm cutting water or the irrigation canal running dry. They experience the impact through price tags. A favorite fruit becomes 50 cents more expensive. A vegetable once available year-round appears less often. Certain brands shrink packaging without lowering cost. These shifts rarely happen in a single dramatic leap. Instead, they show up gradually, like a slow tide rising beneath daily life. Families begin to notice grocery bills increasing even when they buy the same items as before. Parents rethink weekly routines. Children begin to hear the phrase, "We cannot afford that this week." For millions of Americans, especially those already living on stretched budgets, food costs rising are not just an inconvenience. They define lifestyle. They change what is eaten, when, and how often. They change nutrition, quality of life, and health. Most strikingly, this impact does not stay near the reservoirs. If drought constrains farming in the Southwest, a family shopping in Boston still pays more. National supply chains make regional shortages a nationwide expense. When water is no longer enough to sustain agriculture at its former scale, the grocery basket becomes the scoreboard, where every American can see the quiet decline unfold. At this stage, the lake has not emptied. The dam has not stopped. Yet the life of the average American, from how they eat to what they can afford, begins to bend. And the system no longer resembles the stable world previous generations assumed would last forever. As water recedes, communities begin to change. When a reservoir drops low enough that boats can no longer launch and docks sit stranded on cracked ground, The change may appear physical, but the real transformation begins socially. Communities, like ecosystems, rely on stable foundations. Around many American reservoirs, that foundation has always been water. For decades, entire towns grew around the predictability of a full lake. Water meant tourism, recreation, local jobs, stable property values, and an unspoken promise that the future would look similar to the past. Families bought homes because of lake access. Young people took seasonal work at marinas and restaurants. Retirees chose lakeside towns for peace, scenery, and affordability. Visitors came from multiple states away to fish, boat, swim, and celebrate holidays on the shoreline. But when a lake recedes, the decline does not arrive as a dramatic event. It unfolds quietly, and the quietness is the most revealing part. The first sign is often subtle. A marina that once opened for a full season now opens late because the water is too low. A shoreline restaurant announces shorter hours because visitor traffic is down. A lakeside RV park posts a notice: dock access temporarily unavailable. The word temporarily tends to reappear every year and slowly loses meaning. As water retreats farther, businesses adjust. Boat ramps are extended, docks are moved or rebuilt, sometimes multiple times in just a few years. Locals call these projects maintenance, but the truth is more complicated. They are attempts to keep an old lifestyle intact, while the natural condition that once supported it slips away. Eventually, something breaks. A dock cannot be extended any farther. The cost of adjustments exceeds expected revenue. A business owner stops renewing seasonal contracts, not because one bad year occurred, but because conditions are no longer reliable enough to plan. Tourism is built on expectations. When weather, water, and access can no longer be assumed, visitors slowly choose other destinations. As tourism weakens, ripple effects move through the local economy. Seasonal workers, often young adults who rely on summer jobs, now face unpredictable employment. Restaurants that depended on visitors begin laying off staff earlier each year or closing on weekdays. Convenience stores see lower foot traffic. Service providers, from tour guides to equipment rentals, notice income slipping month by month. These changes are rarely reported in national headlines. They are felt at kitchen tables when business owners quietly tell their children that next year might be different. When a family with a lakeside home suddenly realizes selling may not yield what they once expected. When a retired couple hesitates before turning on the air conditioner because electricity has become noticeably more expensive. Housing markets begin shifting next. Waterfront homes have always carried built-in value. The promise of a view, a dock, an experience. When the lake shrinks, that promise weakens. Properties that once sold within days now linger on the market. Discounts appear. Appraisals drop. Homeowners discover that their most valuable asset, the home meant to sustain their retirement, has become unpredictable. Meanwhile, living costs do not wait. Water fees rise. Electricity bills increase. Groceries cost more because agricultural output has tightened. Incomes, however, do not rise alongside them. The result is a quiet but powerful pressure, a pressure that does not force immediate crisis, but forces long-term decisions. Some families decide to leave. They do not leave in a dramatic rush. They leave slowly, one household at a time. A for sale sign appears, then another. Schools begin to consolidate bus routes. The grocery store shortens business hours. A hardware shop closes because the flow of new home construction, once fueled by lakefront development, has dried up. A place that once felt vibrant feels slightly thinner, slightly quieter, slightly less certain. And the emotional shift is often the last to be acknowledged. People who spent decades believing they would never leave now have conversations that would have seemed impossible just 5 years earlier. Maybe it's time. Maybe we can't stay. Maybe this place isn't what it used to be. When enough maybes gather in a community, the population curve begins to bend, not suddenly, but inevitably. History shows this pattern has happened before. American history shows that mass migration rarely looks like a stampede. It looks like a slow redrawing of maps, where dots fade from one location and Brighton in another. It looks like former boomtowns becoming towns people talk about in the past tense. It looks like landscapes that do not collapse, but simply lose momentum. This is what falling water levels create. Not just physical retreat, but emotional retreat. Not just economic disruption, but identity disruption. The realization that a community built on a natural resource is only stable while the resource remains. At this point, the lake is still there. It still reflects sunlight. It still fills in photographs posted on real estate listings. But its meaning has changed. It is no longer a guarantee. It is a variable. And when a resource becomes a variable, the lives built around it begin to feel conditional. That is the fourth impact. An impact that does not show up in engineering reports or water allocations, but shows up in moving trucks, in quiet exits, and in the shrinking sound of a town that once echoed with summer voices. To understand what is unfolding around America's major reservoirs today, you must step back far enough that the lake is no longer simply water, but a symbol. You must look at it from a distance, where water levels become less about measurements on a chart and more about how societies, economies, and identities are built around the things they assume will remain stable. Because the truth, though uncomfortable, is this: what is happening now is not new. The United States has lived through this pattern before. It has happened in cycles, repeatedly, throughout history, and each time it begins quietly. History rarely moves through sudden collapse. Instead, it moves through slow pivots that only become obvious in hindsight. Change begins in technical reports, in slight increases to cost, in small closures that seem local and temporary. Only decades later do people look back and say, that is when everything started. A reservoir is not just a lake. It is a system. It is water allocation, electricity, agriculture, housing, tourism, recreation, and community identity all connected into one chain. The danger lies in that interconnectedness because when the first link weakens, the others eventually follow. Complex systems do not fall apart violently. They rearrange themselves quietly. To understand this rearrangement, you must look at America's past. In the early 20th century, thousands of towns in the Midwest thrived purely because the soil was fertile, the rail lines passed through them, and rainfall was dependable. Their existence felt permanent. Then, agriculture mechanized, farm sizes grew, small farmers were pushed out, rainfall patterns shifted, and rail lines were replaced by highways. Today, countless farming towns are silent, their schools boarded, their post offices gone, their gas stations rusted skeletons. They did not collapse in a single year. They simply faded away because the foundation beneath them changed. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s did not destroy the land forever, but it changed the people. When soil moisture declined, it was not only fields that were lost, it was the future. Millions migrated west, not because their homes turned to dust overnight, but because the system that had once supported their lives no longer provided what it once did. In Appalachia, coal towns arose and grew strong, powered by a single resource. Coal created wealth. Coal built schools, communities, identities, pride. And then markets changed. Environmental laws shifted. Cheaper energy entered. Coal did not disappear in a storm. It dwindled like a fire at the end of the night. Mines closed slowly, one by one. Families left not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Today, many of those towns are shadows where the silence speaks louder than any announcement. They were not destroyed. They were abandoned by time. On the Great Plains, aquifer levels have been falling for years. The Ogallala Aquifer provided irrigation for generations. Now, as groundwater declines, farms consolidate, irrigation contracts, and young people leave. There is no day marked as the day the land ran out of water. There is only the slow reality that agriculture, once a community's anchor, is now a shrinking possibility. This is how America changes, not through explosions, but through evaporation. Reservoir towns in the American West today are standing at the beginning of that same arc. What we call Lake Mead or Lake Powell or Lake Oroville are not just water bodies, they are anchors. They anchor population, economic activity, identity, and psychological certainty. And certainty, more than water, is what truly holds a region together. For decades, certainty has been a silent currency. People buy homes, start businesses, raise families based on a quiet internal calculation that tomorrow will be similar to yesterday, that the future will be familiar. But when an environmental condition becomes visibly unstable, that internal calculation changes long before exterior behavior does. A homeowner begins to wonder whether property values will hold. A business owner hesitates before renewing a lease. A local government delays a major project. Doubt enters, not loudly, but as a whisper. That is when decline begins, not in water meters, but in expectations. And expectations are what shape decisions. This psychological shift is slow and invisible, but more powerful than any visible shoreline change. People do not respond to what is happening. They respond to what they believe will happen next. Look at the lake today. It still holds water. Lights still turn on. Crops still grow. But in water management documents, in grid operation plans, in farming reports, the language has changed. Experts no longer speak of returning to full reservoirs. They speak of managing scarcity. They speak of planning for reduced supply. They speak of a new operating reality. When scarcity becomes something to plan around rather than something to prevent, that is the true turning point. And while people often fear dramatic collapse, collapse is rarely the outcome. The more realistic result is transformation. Regions evolve, economies pivot, communities migrate. This has always been how the United States reshapes itself. The East Coast shipping cities of the 1700s, the railroad boom towns of the 1800s, the industrial giants of the 1900s, they did not disappear through catastrophe. They were replaced by new centers of gravity, and their decline left quiet spaces on the American map that only become obvious from a wide view. If you step far enough back, you see a clear pattern. A resource emerges. Society builds around it. The resource changes. Society slowly reorganizes. Right now, we are witnessing the early stage of that shift. Water, once the foundational certainty of the American West, is transitioning from abundance to limitation. And because so many systems depend on it, this shift will not stay local. In the present, it still feels distant. Many people reassure themselves, this doesn't affect me. Yet, if you pay an electricity bill, it affects you. If you buy groceries, it affects you. If you live in a city whose long-term planning assumes stable water, it affects you. If you have children or grandchildren whose future depends on economic stability where they live, it affects you. The most important part of this story is not the shrinking lake. It is the reminder that foundational systems do not need to fail completely to change everything. They only need to weaken. And once weakened, the impact spreads outward like ripples from a stone dropped into water. A receding shoreline becomes a receding financial future. A declining reservoir becomes a rising utility bill. A decrease in irrigation becomes a shift in national food prices. A slow economic softening becomes a family's decision to leave. Viewed up close, the lake is just lower than before. Viewed from perspective, it is the first domino in a chain that is already moving. And so the question now is no longer whether the system will continue to operate. It will. The question is how long it will continue to operate in the same way, and who will be forced to adapt first. History is not waiting. It has already begun. The system after the water. At this moment, Lake Mead still holds water. The dam still stands. The turbines still turn. The power grid still hums. Cities downstream still draw water through pipes that were engineered generations ago. From a distance, life appears unchanged. But beneath that surface, every system is now operating under pressure it was never designed to carry. What once functioned effortlessly now requires constant adjustment, new rules, alternative planning, and financial sacrifice. America is still running on a foundation built around stable water, even though that stability no longer exists. This is the point in history where consequences are not dramatic, but cumulative. Water restrictions do not arrive as emergency orders, they arrive as new normal. Electricity does not fail. It becomes more expensive and unstable. Food does not vanish. It becomes harder to afford. Communities do not collapse. They quietly thin out as families make difficult decisions, one household at a time. This is how major transitions in American history have always begun. Not with catastrophe, but with gradual erosion of the conditions life depends on. The most dangerous assumption is believing that as long as water remains in the lake, the problem has not yet arrived. But the truth is the opposite. The moment systems are forced to adapt, when allocations are cut, when hydropower becomes unreliable, when farming contracts, when costs rise, that is when the change has already begun. What we are watching is the early stage of a long shift, one that touches every faucet, every light switch, every grocery basket, and every map of where Americans choose to live. Looking forward, the defining question is not how low the reservoirs will fall. The defining question is how Americans will respond as the systems tied to those reservoirs, water, electricity, food, jobs, homes, and identity, begin to operate differently. History suggests that the change will not be loud. It will be quiet. It will be gradual. It will be personal. And one day, the story of Lake Mead will not be remembered as a lake running dry, but as the moment America learned what happens when a foundational assumption, the presence of water, can no longer be trusted. Thank you for staying to the end of this journey. If this changed how you see the reservoirs shaping daily American life, show your support by liking this video. Subscribe to follow the next chapter as we continue uncovering how slow changes reshape nations. Tap the video on your screen to keep exploring the story. Until next time, stay aware, stay prepared, and stay curious.